Muy buenas tardes, con todas, con todos. Bueno, reciban todos un cordial saludo a nombre del Departamento Académico de Educación de la Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. Estamos muy contentos de poder contar en esta oportunidad con la participación del doctor Peter Mangione, ¿no?, quien es un destacado especialista. Creo que el nombre del evento ya dice mucho de lo que nos espera. Asombro, alegría y aprendizaje, descubriendo a los niños de 2 y 3 años. Creo que eso nos da mucha cuenta, no solamente de una persona que estudia la infancia, sino de una persona que conoce la realidad de la infancia desde dentro y que es empático con la primera infancia. Entonces quiero agradecer en primer lugar al doctor Mangione. Quiero también agradecer a la profesora Patricia González como directora de la maestría de políticas y programas, de gestión de políticas y programas para el desarrollo infantil temprano, que nos permite tener esta oportunidad en alianza con organismos internacionales aquí representados y también nacionales. Entonces, este evento es un evento muy importante porque conjuga esfuerzos de quienes estamos pensando las infancias y estamos pensando en cómo atenderlas de mejor manera. Entonces, esta es una fiesta del saber que nos va a acercar un poquito más a la realidad de nuestras infancias y eso me trae una gran alegría. En ese sentido, quiero desearles a todos que disfruten mucho de este espacio, reiterar mi agradecimiento al doctor Mangione, bueno, y que aprovechemos todo de la mejor manera, lo que todos queremos, lo que tenemos todos como deseo, que es mejorar en algo la atención de nuestros niños en primera infancia. Entonces, muchas gracias.
Gracias, querida Mila. Eh, Buenas tardes, igualmente con todas y con todos, ¿no? Como decía Mila, desde la maestría en gestión de políticas y programas para el desarrollo infantil temprano de la Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, es un gran gusto darles la bienvenida a este espacio de reflexión y aprendizaje compartido. Esta tarde nos honra acompañarnos el doctor Peter Mangione, a quien tuve la fortuna de conocer hace algunos años cuando visitó el Perú en el marco de la elaboración de los lineamientos primero a la infancia. Hoy, gracias a la generosa invitación de nuestra querida amiga Pilar Ford, maestra de educación inicial y defensora incansable de una educación de calidad para los niños más pequeños, tenemos nuevamente el privilegio de contar con Peter, quien ha hecho de su valioso espacio, un valioso espacio, perdón, en su recargada agenda para compartir con nosotros su experiencia e investigaciones. Como dijo Mila, este evento se titula Asombro, Alegría y Aprendizaje, descubriendo juntos a los niños de 2 a 3 años. Quisiera aprovechar la oportunidad para compartir una preocupación que siempre transmito a los estudiantes de la maestría: los bajos resultados que muestra la Encuesta Nacional Demográfica y de Salud Infantil, la ENDESDIT, sobre el desarrollo infantil temprano en nuestro país. Esta evaluación, que se recoge anualmente en el marco de la política pública de desarrollo infantil temprano, si bien no capta las particularidades de cada niño, que seguramente Peter abordará, sí refleja una tendencia preocupante. Según los datos del 2024, solo el 42% de niños y niñas de 9 a 36 meses alcanza un desarrollo adecuado de comunicación verbal a nivel comprensivo y expresivo, con una tendencia a la baja en los últimos 6 años. Además, apenas el 39.5% logra resultados favorables en la regulación de emociones y comportamientos, frente a la frustración y al establecimiento de límites. Imaginamos que cifras similares se repiten en varios de los países de América Latina, y por eso creemos que este espacio de reflexión es tan urgente como necesario. Para diseñar esta conferencia nos reunimos con Peter, con Pilar Ford, con Alfredo Ford, profesor de nuestra maestría, con Marisa Ochoa, responsable del programa Educuna y quien nos ha ayudado a difundir este evento a nivel nacional, y compartimos con Peter nuestras preocupaciones y avances, así como las necesidades de que las docentes profundicen en el conocimiento del desarrollo de los niños de 2 a 3 años, que constituye la mayoría de la población que atiende el programa Educunas. Con esa información, Peter, con el apoyo de Pili, armaron esta propuesta que hoy nos presenta. Antes de presentar a nuestro querido invitado, quisiera agradecer especialmente la presencia de Emma Aguirre, nuestra directora nacional de Educunas, a todas las docentes, auxiliares, especialistas de Educunas y de Cunamás que se encuentran en todo el territorio nacional, sé que han sido convocadas a nivel nacional, de las estudiantes, docentes de pregrado y posgrado de nuestra casa de estudios, representantes de la sociedad civil, de los sectores del Ministerio de Educación, del Ministerio de Desarrollo e Inclusión Social, del Ministerio de la Mujer y Poblaciones Vulnerables, del Ministerio de Salud, que se inscribieron en el marco de este evento. Me imagino que todos están ahora acá presentes. Y a nivel internacional, quiero también mencionar algunas personas que Pilar nos mencionó que iban a estar presentes. Agradecer la presencia de Javier Negrón, director de la Asociación de Directores del programa Head Start de Puerto Rico, de Diana Whithead, presidenta y CEO de Childhood Education International, de Raúl Mercel y Alfredo Ford, ambos médicos de la Organización Panamericana de Salud. Además, tenemos representantes de instituciones gubernamentales de El Salvador, docentes y estudiantes de la Universidad Pedagógica de El Salvador, representantes de la Fundación Cirama de El Salvador, de la Institución Civil de México, amigos y amigos de Colombia y de Chile. A todos ellos, muchas gracias y bienvenidos a este espacio de diálogo y construcción conjunta. Y ahora sí, con mucho cariño y admiración, les presento a nuestro querido Peter Mangione. Peter es miembro principal de WESET y dirige el programa de cuidado de bebés y niños pequeños, PITS, un modelo nacional y sistema de desarrollo profesional en la primera infancia. Peter ha liderado el desarrollo de estándares y currículos de aprendizaje y desarrollo temprano, guías para programas de bebés y niños pequeños y preescolar, recursos para apoyar a niños pequeños multilingües y competencias para educadores de la primera infancia. Creó el instrumento de observación, documentación y reflexión de PITS y el sistema de evaluación y reflexión del programa. Peter, además, es uno de los principales colaboradores en el desarrollo del perfil de desarrollo de resultados deseados del Departamento de Educación de California. Sus publicaciones abarcan una variedad de temas, incluyendo enfoques integrales para el desarrollo profesional de la primera infancia, el cuidado basado en las relaciones para el bebé y los niños pequeños y la participación familiar receptiva. Ha presentado en conferencias nacionales e internacionales, se ha presentado en conferencias nacionales e internacionales de desarrollo infantil e investigaciones educativas en China, Alemania, Hungría, Japón, acá en Perú, Singapur y Estados Unidos. Peter ha formado parte de grupos de asesores y expertos para el Departamento de Educación y el Departamento de Salud y Servicios Humanos de los Estados Unidos, la Asociación Nacional para la Educación de Niños Pequeños, la Oficina Head Start en el Gobierno de Singapur, Zero to Three, y realizó estudios postdoctorales sobre el desarrollo infantil en el Max Planck Instituto Nacional de Psiquiatría en Múnich, Alemania. Finalmente, los invitamos a todos a hacer sus preguntas y comentarios a través del chat. Carmen Sandoval, directora de la carrera de Educación Inicial, las recogerá para compartir con Peter al final de la conferencia. Para quienes necesiten la traducción, estaremos colocando las instrucciones en el chat. Bienvenido, querido Peter.
Thank you, Patricia and Maritza and Luzmela. I am honored to be with you today. It's wonderful for me to be able to share my experience and work with you. And I look forward to, after I do the presentation, to hearing your questions and having some conversation with you about what's foremost on your mind and what you think is most important around this whole area of how we can best support 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds so that they thrive, so that they learn well and are able to regulate their emotions and can go on to the next level and be very successful. I need a moment here to set up my PowerPoint, so bear with me while I share my screen. Is that working for everyone? Can you see it okay? Okay, great. Thank you.
Sí, perfecto.
Okay. As was introduced, I am going to be focusing on the development and really learning about how 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds develop. And my focus is wonder, joy, and learning. I think that's so important, as you'll hear and as I go through my presentation this afternoon. You'll get an idea of what I mean by this, why these kinds of emotional parts of the child's experience are so important for the learning parts. We want both to work together. So my talk is organized in the following way. I will begin by focusing on the child and thinking about what that development looks like and how they engage in learning with us and by themselves. Then I'm going to turn to what's so important, and that is the role of the adult in this learning process. It is very true, as I will explore with you today, that children are active learners who initiate their own learning. They're very competent at that, but they also need us adults in order to learn. And what we want to do is explore exactly how we can relate to this active learner and be the best support possible for them. After we explore the idea of relationship, we will say, okay, relationship is important, but what does that look like? And what that looks like is we need to be responsive in our relationships with children. And I will describe some of the aspects of responsiveness. I will talk about how in the Program for Infant Toddler Care, or what we call PITC, we think about the responsive process. In many places, with many people who provide care and education to young children, birth to 3 years of age, we've shared this process, we've worked on this process with them, and they have found it to be quite useful. I will then turn, after we talk about being responsive, how we can be responsive to different individuals, because we know that children differ from each other, and we need to adapt the care to each one of those individuals. I am going to focus in particular on the temperament of infants and toddlers, or what we call in the PITC, the Program for Infant Toddler Care, temperament tendencies. So, but that's just one aspect of individuality. I can allude to others as well, but I'm going to concentrate on that one today. And then finally, I will close with some final thoughts. Let's begin with learning. And when we think about learning, what we want to do, and a lot of my thoughts about this have been influenced by the work in Reggio Emilia, Italy, is what is our image of that child as a learner? And when we think about that image of the child as a learner, we want to think about what does that image look like from the point of view of the child? How is the child experiencing interaction and learning? And what can we do as we create an image for ourselves that takes into who that whole child is and what our relationship with that child means in the process of learning? I'd like to start with a thought from Stanley Greenspan, who many years ago wrote this. And what he said was that emotions really are at the center of all of development. And I take this thought from Stanley Greenspan And I think in a very simple phrase, we can express what he is telling us. And that simple phrase is, emotions drive early learning. That it is the pleasure, the joy that the child has in making discoveries, in making sense of things, in making connections with us and seeing our interest and sharing a meaning with us. It's the pleasure that the child receives from those experiences that motivates the child to keep learning. And so at the beginning, when we start to think about this, we don't have to motivate the child to learn. But what we do have to do is think about, are we creating the kind of experience, the kind of context for experience that will give the child the opportunity to express and experience that joy that comes from interacting with us and learning. As part of our image of this young child, this 2-year-old or 3-year-old, I want us to consider all the different aspects of how that child learns. There are many different aspects. And when we first look at a child engaged in learning, a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, we may see one thing. But if we keep observing that child, we will see a lot of different things. We will see moments of wonder. We will see moments when they're amazed by what they just discovered or amazed by what they've just observed. So we may see them marvel at things. We may see great joy and enthusiasm as they engage in learning. We may see them being inventive, coming up with new ideas and trying them out, making changes. We may see a fascination with how one thing changes to another. We will see them in moments when they're confused, they're disoriented, they don't know what's going on, and they may look to us for reassurance or some kind of understanding. We'll see them reflect on what happens and then try out based on that reflection. A big part of what we're going to see when we start observing those 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds carefully is how they imitate what we do, especially what we do. If they have close relationships with us that they feel very positive about, that they gain pleasure with, have joy in, they will naturally want to imitate and learn from us. We'll see them be surprised. We'll see them kind of observe and learn through observing. We know from a lot of cross-cultural studies that learning through observing is very important for young children. An idea from Ray O'Malley, we will see them have theories and test out those theories, hypothesize and test out what's going to happen. We will see them engaging in communication with us a lot non-verbally and more verbally, and we want to support that verbal development. I will talk about that later in this presentation. We will see them being very thoughtful, and we will see them making connections. Those are all important learning experiences, and it's a much fuller image of the child than we usually have when we first look at a child. The first thought we have. We want to keep looking. We want to keep seeing all the different ways that this child is developing. My colleague, Mary Jane McGuire-Thong, shared this idea with me and that I want to share with you. And that is, when we observe that young child engaged in learning, what we're observing is like a scientist at work. And the comparison works pretty well when you think about it. Let's take a look at each one of these. Both the scientist and that 2-year-old, 3-year-old, they wonder about things. They're trying to make sense of things that are not yet known. They're trying to make discoveries that they don't yet know about. That's the work of a scientist. That's also the work of a young child. They investigate when they want to know. When they're exploring that unknown, they actively investigate. with focused attention. Whenever you see a young child, that 2-year-old or 3-year-old engaged in testing something out or doing an exploration, what you see is that concentration from the child. They want to make sense of the world around them, and they do it through this exploration and investigation. Both the scientist and that young child depend on having a place where they can study and do their work. For that young child, it's a place that's quiet, where they can focus their attention with the kinds of things and materials and possibilities from the natural world that they would naturally be drawn to explore and investigate. And finally, and this is very important when we think about the scientists, they're using all their senses to learn about the world. And when we see young children, those 2-year-olds or those 3-year-olds, even younger ones, they're using all their senses to learn about the world, not just their brains, right? If you sit back and ask a 2-year-old where their brain is, that child might show you their hand because that's what they're using to learn with. So what we want to think about is, are we providing the kind of situations that allow children to use all their senses to make meaning, to make sense of the world in which they are in? Another aspect of that image of the young child comes from a whole body of research on early brain development. There has been so much research in the last 30 years. And what we've learned from that research, we've learned a lot, but I'm going to point out one thing here in particular, is that when children engage in learning and interaction, especially with other people, groups of neurons or brain cells, we call them neurons or brain cells, essentially, fire together. They make connections together. And what those connections in the brain do, after repeated experiences, those connections keep getting made and keep getting strengthened. What they do, and the way our human brains work, is they allow us to anticipate, to be prepared for similar situations. So we're learning how to deal with those situations that are similar. And that's very important for the young child because they're trying to make sense of how to be in our world. And in order to do that, they need to have patterns that they can use. So when we provide children, and I'm going to explore this more deeply with you in a couple minutes, when we provide children those opportunities to have these repeated experiences and then apply them to similar situations, that's a very important learning for them. Another aspect of that developing brain in early learning is that as the brain grows, it's through actively interacting with the world around it. And the most important thing in the world around it are the people. Because we have so much knowledge, so much information about how the world works, that young child is learning from us. They're learning from us how to relate socially. What are our social rules for interacting with each other? They're learning from us how to relate emotionally. They're learning about our culture. What do we value? What do we believe in? And they're learning about how we relate to that physical world around us. What do we build? How do we organize space? What do we put in the space? How does that work for humans? Humans like us. They want to make these connections because they want to become part of the human community in which they're in. And that is a basic, important task for infants, for toddlers, for those 2-year-olds and those 3-year-olds, to learn how to be a full member of the community they're in. And part of that learning is relating to them already as a full member, respecting that they're part of our community as much as anyone else. When we think about these connections, I always think about some words from Daniel Siegel, who is a psychiatrist at University of California, Los Angeles in the United States. And he, again, like that earlier phrase I said, emotions drive early learning, just a simple phrase that we can hold on to and think about. The phrase from him is, human connections create brain connections. And that is fundamentally important. And when we think about our image of the child, our image of that 2-year-old or 3-year-old engaging in the world, what we want to think about is that that child is making human connections. And as the child is making those human connections, there are connections being created in that child's brain. So when we're talking about this early development and what's happening, it's the whole person, including that developing brain. And we want to keep that whole person in mind and what it means to that person, that developing child, that 2-year-old, that 3-year-old, when they have experience with us. So I've been talking about the image of the child. And as I talk about this image of the child, part of that image is there's great vulnerability. Let's think about this for a moment. That child is dependent on the adults caring for them. It's dependent for physical survival. We know that that 2-year-old would not survive without us. As capable, as great as that 2-year-old is, that 2-year-old absolutely needs us to survive physically. Food, shelter, all of that is important for their life. We know that they are vulnerable around their emotional experience, and that stress in their lives can have a very negative effect on their emotional development. Too much stress can overwhelm a child. So they're very vulnerable. And what they need from us is to help them gain some emotional security so that they can manage the stress. It's through emotional security in relationships with us that they become better able to manage the stress that they experience. We know life is going to have stress, right? That's part of life. And we know that even as adults, what helps us emotionally are those relationships around us that we can trust and turn to when we're going through an emotional experience that's difficult. And when we're working with children, and I know some of you are, working with children under extreme stress, whether it's financial for the children's families or other circumstances, they need that emotional security even more. And so in our work with them, that's a very important aspect. And we know that emotional security, and I'm going to explore this more with you in a little while, comes from those relationship experiences. They also use that emotional security for learning. Just think about it. Once the child can feel secure, I'm going to be taken care of here, then I'm ready to explore and move out, but not until then. So they need that emotional security, not only to help them regulate themselves, but to engage in learning. They need to learn from us about culture, about the rules of living, for the ways of carrying on in the world. And the way they do that is through the regulation we help them with. We help them emotionally regulate themselves. We help them regulate their behavior. We're guides for them, and they need our guidance. They're vulnerable. So all of that is a vulnerability, and the young child is aware of that. The young child is aware of their dependence on us, and they need from us that supportive, nurturing response that gives them the message, I'm here to take care of you. I want you to do well. I'm very interested in how you're doing, and I'm going to be with you throughout your whole experience. Now, a lot of times when we start talking about great vulnerability, we forget that fundamentally the child has great competence. And the tendency is either to think about the child's really vulnerable or the child's really competent. But at any moment, a full image of the child will see that child both as vulnerable, needing that kind of support, that emotional support, that support with learning, and at the same time is tremendously competent. We see it every moment we're with that 2-year-old or 3-year-old. We see the curiosity. We see the self-initiated motivation. We see the child who is someone who is an imitator, who learns through imitation, who's trying to make sense of things, who's making connections. We see a child who's exploring and inventing. Go back to that list I showed a couple of slides back. We see a child who is communicating with us and understands very early in life that the better I can communicate with you, the better I'm going to get my needs met and the stronger relationship we're going to have. And so that child is naturally drawn to start that communication. We see that child looking for meaning and wanting to share meaning with us. We humans, we don't function very well in the world when we're isolated from other humans. What we humans do best, when we do our best, it's when we are with others and sharing meaningful experiences with others. Just like it's that way for adults, it's that way for those 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. And they need us to do that with them, and they need opportunities to do that with each other. And they are relationship builders. Even if we think of that even much earlier than 2 and 3 years of age, that 1-month-old, that 2-month-old already is very competent at getting us to engage in a relationship with them. We look at that child does something that charms us, that makes us feel joy, and makes us want to connect more deeply with that child, wants us to keep developing that relationship. And that's that child's competence. So we have this child who, yes, is very vulnerable, needs our support, but also is this very competent being who's capable of doing so much for themselves and who is capable of being so much part of a group of people who are together. If we can help children with that vulnerability, what we have is that we create the conditions for children to maximize being the competent person that they are. So what is our role? How do we think about this? When we think about this child who has these great needs, is vulnerable, and also is very competent, what do we do? What are the first things we need to think about as we think about giving attention both to that vulnerable side of the child and the competent side? Well, we thought about it in the PITC as we call it the 3 R's. In the United States, the 3 R's are reading, writing, and arithmetic. In our work with the PITC, we changed that. We said, no, early in life, there are different 3 R's. And those 3 R's are, as you can see here, relationship, responsiveness within a relationship, and respect for who that child is, their competence, and really seeing them as that active child who can reach out and connect with us. And so they want to be respected in that way. They want to be respected for who they are and who they are becoming and what they are learning, both with us and with their families and in their communities. All of that learning is important for that child who's making sense of the world. Okay, so now I've spent a good deal of time here talking about what's our image of the child. What image do we have? And I started to suggest that what the child needs was from us more than anything else are relationships, responsiveness, and respect. Let's turn to what we mean by relationships. What does that look like? What are we adults bringing to that learning experience, to those interactions that are most meaningful to infants and toddlers? We have this idea from the PITC that when we think about what's important in a young child's life, after that child's basic needs for food, health, and safety are cared for, if that basic nurturance is happening, the primary ingredient from the outside, from the environment, is the relationships that child has. Those close relationships are the primary ingredient for that child's ability to develop well. So that's our starting point. We know this from research. Research study after research study has confirmed for us that at the center of that young child's experience are the relationships, those close relationships with the adults caring for them. And as they continue to develop, the other children in their group, those relationships are very important too. So what are they receiving from us in those relationships? What are some of the key things that they're getting from us? When I look at this list, I think about it as two groups. One is the first four. So, and that's more attending, right? At the same time, attending to that child's vulnerability. It's giving that basic nurturance. It's giving that child a sense of support. The child can relax, can be at ease, can know that they're going to be supported, can be secure about that we're helping them feel emotionally secure through our relationship. We want them to know from us, if something goes wrong, I'm here for you and I'm going to support you. You don't have to deal with this alone. You have this connection with me and I'm going to be supportive. And what's really key about that is that you are predictably supportive in the relationship. Because think back to what I said about how that developing brain is working. And that is that those repeated experiences, those same brain cells, those same neurons are firing. And so they need predictable experience from us to feel like they're going to be taken care of. So when we think about how our relationship is working with the child, we need to think about, are we being predictable? Can they count on us to engage with them, to interact, to respond in a certain way, time after time in similar situations? So that's around that vulnerable part, but at the same time, we need to attend to that competent child. Because that's really what it's all about. We want competent children who are learning, who are engaging, who are learning how to communicate with us and learning language, learning how to solve problems, learning about basic math concepts, learning about how things in the world work. We want all that learning to happen. And we have a role here. Think about that comparison of the scientist and the young child. Focus. What are we doing to help that child focus on learning? Because we know if we can create situations where that child can focus on learning, that child will express that competence. We'll see that competent child play and explore, make discoveries, because they can focus. Just like a scientist needs that quiet place with interesting things and natural things and the things we make available to infants and toddlers and those 2 and 3-year-olds, that they have that to focus on in a place that's a good place for them to do that exploration. They need encouragement from us. They are very interested in sharing life with us. They look to us, the people they're developing relationships with, for that encouragement. When they accomplish something, when they solve a problem, when they figure out something, when they make sense of something, you'll see that 2-year-old or 3-year-old often look to us for that confirmation, for that encouragement. When they're trying on a new challenge, maybe climbing a little higher than they're used to climbing, or maybe trying to eat their food with a utensil, or whatever it might be, you see them trying, and then they look to us to say, do you think I can do this? And that quiet encouragement that we give, yes, I think you can do it. And you know what? If you have a problem, if it becomes too much for you, I'm here to help you. And I'm going to give you the amount of help you need to keep doing it yourself. And then finally, we're providing some expansion. So if we notice, for example, that children are particularly interested in a certain kind of story or a certain kind of song or a certain kind of activity, we can start thinking about what else can we do? What else can, if the child's interested in building, what other kinds of materials can we give that child or those children, those 2-year-olds, those 3-year-olds, so that they can not only build with the plastic blocks we've given them, but maybe they can build with big wooden blocks, or maybe they can build with something entirely new from outside. You want to be imaginative. You want to take that interest, that focus of the child, the question that the child's asking, whatever they're trying to figure out, and say, what else can I add in this situation so the child can keep doing that exploration? When the child communicates to us, when the child says another book or book, let's say the child has a book and then it says book again, meaning that the child wants 2 books. You can say in response to the child, you can do an expansion. You can say, oh, you want 2 books. So what you're doing is you're focusing on the child's interest, books, and at the same time, adding some information. And you have that child's attention at that moment because the child wants a book. And so the child's going to be attending to you and hearing that 2 books, hearing that expansion. And so those moments that we see that child engaged in something and we can think of through our observation, through really getting to know where that child's interest is and focus, being mindful of how that child's communicating to us, then we can add that extra piece of information, that extra piece of material that allows the child to keep going. So we are playing a lot of different roles in our relationship with the child, and we're connecting with that image of that child who's learning in all these different ways. So when we think about the impact of caregivers, of the adults caring for the infants, of the adults caring for those 2-year-olds, for those 3-year-olds, we see some very important pieces here. It really does have an impact on their ability to develop and attach with other human beings. And as I've already said, human attachments are fundamentally important. We know that it's through interaction with their caregivers that they are learning how to regulate their impulses. We know that they are learning to communicate with others and that they are trying to gain an understanding of the world, an intellectual understanding, to make sense of the world around them. So what we often do when we think about children's learning is focus on that last point of the four. We often go right to the intellectual development. What is the child learning cognitively? What do I need to teach the child? But when we think of our impact as a teacher or an educator, it's all of these things for that 2-year-old or a 3-year-old that are important. And if we attend to all of these things, then the intellectual development will thrive. But if we leave out that emotional part of the experience, if we leave out thinking about how to help children regulate their impulses, we know we lose some of the power that we have when we support them intellectually, because they're not going to be able to focus as well without that emotional support, without our relating to all the different things that child is attending to in each experience. This list was developed by my colleague, the founder of PITC. I was with him and we co-founded it, but he certainly was our leader at the time, Ron Lally. And he said, you know, one of the things that young children are receiving from us is confidence in who they are, confidence in what they do, or they don't have it. And he had this wonderful way of talking about, in very simple words, how that child is experiencing it. From the child's point of view, what messages are we giving in our relationships? One is, am I listened to as a child? Is this adult whom I'm dependent on? I know I'm dependent, and who has all this information, who's going to help me become part of this human family and community? Or am I not listened to? What I choose to do, what I'm trying to make sense of, the question that I have in mind, the problem I'm trying to solve, is that valued by this very important adult in my life? Or is it not valued? Does the adult ignore it? Or does the adult want me to focus on something else instead of what I'm focused on? Are the ways I express my emotions accepted or not? When a child expresses an emotion, it's giving us a message. Are we open to it? Do we accept it? Or do we not accept it? Am I permitted to explore, which I'm so driven to do? That's the way I learn. Or am I not permitted? Am I restricted, restrained? Are most of my needs met? Or are they not met? And I'm going to come back to this point. Most is a very important word here. It's unrealistic to expect that every moment we're going to meet every need. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is mostly being there, being predictable. And that's what the child is looking for from us. And I think this is very important, especially when we're talking about diverse populations and people who are living in various families who are living in various circumstances. We need to have that respect for the child and the family. And the child needs messages from us that we respect the child for who that child is and where that child comes from and who the family is. That's a basic message in life. And children will develop self-confidence if they see themselves and the most important people in their lives being respected. So, and that's ultimately what we're looking for. We want that child to have confidence in self, to be a learner, to be someone who relates well with others, and can keep developing relationships and can keep learning. So here's just a summary of what I've been talking about, which is learning begins in relationships. It's the beginning point, always. It's informed by relationships. It's informed by those interactions and relationships. And it is supported by relationships, the kinds of environments we create for children, the kinds of materials we give them, the kinds of ways that we support them emotionally and meet their basic needs. Relationships are, all of that is fundamentally important for learning. If we really are interested in that 2-year-old or that 3-year-old learning better than they've been learning, then we need to start with the relationship. So let's turn now to what do we mean by a relationship-based approach when we have infants and toddlers in group situations, when we have those 2-year-olds. I keep saying infants and toddlers because I think of that whole age period, but I'm really thinking, and the image I have in mind right now is a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And that 2-year-old or 3-year-old needs to feel connected, close to the situation, needs to feel like they belong. They need that relationship. They need the joy in the relationship to be motivated to keep learning. They need to experience that love from us, that we really are fascinated with them, that we're passionate about them, that we care deeply about them. They need our respect for who they are and how they do things, where they come from. But in addition to respect, they need affirmation. They need to hear, they need messages from us. They need to hear these messages that say, yes, the person you're becoming, I'm excited about that person. And I'm going to encourage you to keep becoming that person. You need time together in a relationship. Relationships don't happen overnight. They develop over time. We need to set up our group situations for 2-year-olds, for 3-year-olds that allow those relationships to develop. We can't keep changing the people who are caring for them. We can't keep changing the groups and expect children to do well. They need time together for that relationship to have the power that it's meant to have. They need a relationship that's responsive and predictable. And I'm going to talk about responsiveness next. And finally, Jerry Paul, who at one time directed the infant parent program at the University of California, San Francisco. She had this really interesting idea when she wrote some work for the PITC and said that, outside the family, we can, as educators, as carers, provide a very special kind of relationship for children. We can provide a warm relationship, not an intense one. Often in the family context, things become hot. I can say that for myself as a parent. I had much stronger, more intense feelings about my own children than all the children I worked with when I worked in group care situations. I loved the children I worked with in group care situations. I enjoyed them greatly, but it wasn't as intense, and I didn't get worked up as much. I was able to give them calmness, warmth, this underlying feeling of support. It's very special what educators or carers can give that's different from what they get from their families. That intensity is very important in families. You want that. You want to see that intense love in families, that intense joy. But that child needs to experience other relationships and can thrive in these different kinds of relationships. So let's talk about responsiveness. I need to check time here for a moment. Let's talk about responsiveness. I'll go right into it. So when we're talking about being responsive to develop a secure relationship for children, we need to be available to them. So when they need us, we need to be there for them. It's not a matter of, I feel like playing with the child now. I know you all don't do that, but that doesn't work. They need us when they need us, we need to be there for them. They need us to listen and observe. So they get the messages. We get who you are. We hear you, we see you, we understand what your interests are, what your questions are, what your concerns are, what your needs are, and we're going to be responsive. So they need responsiveness that's timely. That doesn't mean like lickety-split or really fast necessarily. For an infants, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, they process information more slowly than we adults do. And so when we're thinking of that young child, we want to find that child's pace, and we learn that child's pace through observing. But they need promptness. They wait, a certain amount of wait time is appropriate, but too much wait time, what happens is the next point, they lose the connection between our messages. They need to be able to connect what they're doing with what we do. And so that promptness helps that. That's very important. And we have to, when we respond, we need to match the child's interests or question or need in a way that is meaningful. We may not get it the first time, but we keep trying until we do get it. And we need to be predictable most of the time. When I say most of the time, what we know is in relationships that it needs to be good enough. It's like most of the time we're responsive, but we don't have to be perfect. And I think we need to, all of us, I know for myself, when I'm involved with the care of children, young children, I feel they need perfection from me. But really what they need is authenticity. They need me to be myself and predictable. So I make a good concerted effort to be responsive, to be predictable. But there are times when I can't be. And that's part of life. The child learns that we're not in a perfect world. We're in a world where people will do what they can to support each other. And sometimes you have to wait a little longer. Sometimes it isn't quite exactly what you needed, but most of the time it is. In the PITC, to support adults to learn to become responsive, we came up with what we call the responsive process. And there are basically 3 steps. One is watch. You begin by watching, by observing. You don't rush in and say, this is my idea, and this is what should happen, but you see what the child's idea is. You take in what the child's interest is or need. So you need to take the time to watch and see that. And then ask yourself, what is the child's message? It's a moment of reflection. It's asking yourself, what is that child trying to communicate to me right now? And then you have an idea and you say, well, I think it's this. And then you adapt, you try something out. And sometimes you connect and sometimes you don't. And it isn't that you just do this once. As you can see in our image here, it's a circle that keeps happening because the child is going to keep changing. The child's transformative. So you need to keep observing, keep asking, keep adapting in your relationship with that child and see where that child is going and be with that child as the child goes. And you know, a lot of times we have our own ideas. I'm going to stop for a moment to take a little drink of water here. And sometimes our ideas get in the way of being responsive. We stop that observing of the child. And I'd like to share with you an experience that I had with my first daughter, Julia, when she was, this is younger than 2 years of age. She was around 11 months at the time, and she was learning language. it was a bath time, and I had just finished giving a bath with her. And I took her, and she was very excited. She was babbling very actively and had this joyful look on her face. I have, my wife was taking a video of this. That's why I can tell this story. I also was very joyful. I had a smile and I was very excited. I took her to the changing surface and got her clothes out, got her diaper out. And she was babbling, kept babbling. And all of a sudden, she's babbling. And what is she babbling? Die, die, die. And I heard that. And I thought, I must have thought, oh, I can shape this. She's saying die, die, die. This is all in English. This may not translate that well. Maybe it will. She's saying die, die, die. And then I make a little change. Instead of die, 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 I say dad, dad, dad. And we know that dad is father, papa in other languages. And so I had this idea. Let's have her say my dada. Let's have papa, have her say that instead of what she was saying. But then I stepped back and looked at the child. So first I had my idea, but then I needed to know the child's idea. And what was the child's idea? Well, at that time, my wife and I were using cloth diapers. And I don't know about you if you've ever used a cloth diaper, but you need to pin it. And the pin works much better if it has a little bit of oil or grease on it. So I would always run the pin through my hair a little bit, and it would pin very easily. I'm getting ready to put the diaper on Julia and pin the diaper. And what is she doing as she's babbling, die, die, die? She is touching the side of her head and then touching her hip and saying die, 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 communicating at a much deeper level than the idea of learning dada or saying dada. Her idea was so important for her learning, and she's making these connections. How did she make those connections? Well, every time that I would go to change a diaper or my wife would go to change a diaper, we'd say, Julia, here's your diaper. Julia, I'm going to put your diaper on. Julia, I'm going to pin your diaper. So she's getting the sound, she's getting the words as we're interacting around this routine. And so what we want to do is help them make those connections. We give them we make language part of the experience for them, a natural part of our relationship, a natural part of the way we interact. But if we come with our idea and just try to teach a word, it's not going to work as well. So we need to think about how we're engaging the child and giving that repeated experience. So when we're talking about being emotionally attuned to a child, it's this balance between familiarity, because that child really needs that predictability and familiarity to know how to act. But we all know from our human relationships that nothing is predictable. There's a certain uncertainty in life. And so it's that mostly familiar, but also the openness to novelty, to the surprise, to being flexible. And it's that infant that 2-year-old or 3-year-old who loves the familiarity, uses that to learn, but also it likes to be surprised, learns from being disoriented for a moment. And so what we're doing is we're adjusting emotionally to the child moment by moment. And that little dance between what's predictable and what's new in this situation is what is going to help that child learn. Emotional regulation. When we are talking about those 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, it's not realistic to expect them to be able to regulate themselves emotionally. They're not yet ready. They need us to help them regulate. Now, they have some skill at regulation, and we want to recognize and respect that competence that they've developed. They have some. So often now what's called, what we talk about is co-regulation. So, or guided regulation, guided self-regulation. So how much guidance does that child need in order to regulate self? And so if we observe and are responsive, we can judge, okay, I need to give a little support here. I need to make a suggestion so the child can regulate. Or I need to offer another experience so the child can focus their attention on something that supports them emotionally. So it's that guided self-regulation. We're no longer doing everything for the child. When they were young infants, we did everything for the child to regulate. When the child was upset, we picked up the child, we patted the child, we walked with the child. We were trying to help that. We were doing the regulating a lot. The infant had some ways of regulating, and we need to recognize that. But mostly it was from the adult. As children are developing, it's how can I back off, help doing the regulation, letting the child be competent at regulating, but knowing when that child needs that guidance to keep regulating. So it's, again, it's this sensitive observing, asking yourself, what does the child need from me now? So how are we helping this learning process? I'll go through this list very quickly. We're helping the child, and in fact, I'm running out of time, so I'll go through it quite quickly. You can read the list there, but this is mainly about, we say the child has, where am I? I'm not on the right slide, just a second. I'm sorry, I got off here. This point is a very important point for attachment relationships. And it's this idea of feeling felt. And it's probably an essential ingredient in attachment relationships. And we know children need secure attachment relationships to do well. There's research that shows that children at 5 years old actually can learn to read, or 6 or 7 can learn to read better, have more language if they've had secure attachment relationships. And part of that is someone else getting the idea that someone else understands my feelings. And that comes from that predictable emotional support that we give. So how do we support learning? We talk about in the PITC that the child has their own curriculum. So we need to plan experiences for learning, how the environment is set up, and et cetera, and give responses in our communication that the child can connect with, rather than coming in and having an experience that we take them through. We don't have to design lessons, but we have to connect with their curriculum. And so the environment is very important, and so are the materials that we select. I've already talked about we need to observe, ask, and adapt. And we need to look for ways to expand, that idea of expansion, rather than interrupt the learning that the child is engaged in. I want to take a moment on this point about bathing the child in language. This is a very important concept. Children need language from us to learn language. We need to use language. We use the idea of bathing, and we want to use it naturally. Bathing is different from drowning. It's not talking to the child all the time. It's not nonstop talking. It's talking to the child when you're getting a cue. I'm interested in talking with you. It's communicating in a way that, yes, when there's an opportunity around a routine to use that language, or when that child looks to us for encouragement, we use language, or when there's a moment to do a little expansion, we do that expansion. You want 2 books. You want 2 big books. All of that are expansions. So that's that bathing. But we use songs that are very appealing to children and rhyming games. So we need to think about how are we bathing children in language, but not overwhelming them with language. And if children will give you cues if you're overwhelming them. They'll look away, they won't pay attention. They will learn language those moments when they're paying attention. And through our observation, we can and asking ourselves what's going on with the child right now, we can find those moments to bathe the child in language. And we have to, you can think back to that slide I showed, really attend to those messages about the child's sense of self. So what is the child gaining? They're gaining this sense of belonging, they're gaining the sense of security, and they continue to explore and learn and engage in shared meaning with us. That's what these responsive relationships provide the child. I want to take a few moments here to talk about temperament, because that's one way of thinking about individuality. The child's experiences in life influence who that individual is. No two children are the same. Temperament is an important part of that. When we talk about temperament, and the research in the last 20 years or so has given us some ideas about temperament that are a little different from before. We're moving from the idea that temperament you're born with and that's where you're always going to be, to it's something that develops. And that some parts of temperament are less stable than we once thought. It's a process that is, yes, genetic. Genetics plays a role, but so does the child's biology, and so does the environment. It's a concept of tendencies. We show all the different temperaments, but different children show different degrees. So children might be extreme, or they might not show a particular temperament tendency at all, or hardly at all. And there are cultural differences around ideal temperaments. Some cultures like that active child and really encourage children to be that way. Others really go for the quietness and that part of the dimension. No matter what temperament tendency we're talking about, we encourage people to see it as a strength. It's what how the child learns, how the child engages and interacts. We need to respect that and provide the child openness to expand out from that, rather than have the child feel like the way they are really is not acceptable. Yes, it's acceptable. Not only is it acceptable, we respect it and we want to affirm it. Very quickly, these are the temperament. If you look on the right, the research in the last 25 years or so has 3 areas of temperament: activity level, affect or emotions, and regulation, self-regulation. So we have identified, you can look on the left from the literature, the PITC, we've identified these tendencies, the level of activity, the reaction to the unfamiliar, attention and regulation, and then identifying some of those emotions. Anger, irritability, frustration is a tendency, a kind of emotional response. So is enthusiasm, exuberance, and cheerfulness. We have a few more minutes here, and I know that I promised questions, but I would like to take 4 minutes to show this video, which will introduce you to temperament, the way we think about it in PITC.
PITC, the Program for Infant Toddler Care, a collaboration of the California Department of Education and WestEd. Temperament in Infants and Toddlers. Introduction. This series of short videos defines and gives examples of the temperament tendencies of young children. These tendencies develop early and contribute greatly to the unique way each child relates to the world. Temperament tendencies start to form from the genes we've had passed down to us from our ancestors. Our genes are influenced by the environment, even the environment of the womb. And right from the start of life, environment influences when, how, and even if genes are expressed, creating variations in the neurochemistry of our brains. The more temperament is studied, the more it becomes clear that a person has a number of temperament tendencies that are exhibited at different levels of intensity and duration. They are triggered at different points in life and weave together to create an individual's unique way of relating to the world. As new research is gathered, it's anticipated that a deeper understanding will be found of how the environment influences chemicals in the brain that blend together to form one's temperament mix. This series looks at high and low levels of 5 major temperament tendencies in infants and toddlers. Here are examples of the high ends of each of these tendencies. Activity level. Periods of energetic body movements and quick or loud speech.
I'm in here, Macio.
Reaction to the unexpected. Experiencing unfamiliar people and situations with wariness and caution. Attention and regulation. Keeping attention on things and not being easily distracted.
You forgot me.
Anger, irritability, and frustration. An acute sensitivity to the social and physical environment, resulting in frequent expressions of anger, irritability, or frustration. Exuberance, enthusiasm, and cheerfulness. Enjoyment of high-intensity activities and great pleasure in pursuing and attaining goals. These tendencies combine to form a unique genetic, biological, and environmental mix to individualize each child's way of viewing and relating to life. The videos in this series provide a more in-depth look at each of.
So that is our information about just a quick overview what we do in this video series, and it's available publicly. You can have access to them in a service from the California Department of Social Services. I can actually, Patricia provide you with that link so that if people are interested in it, they can get more of the in-depth, because we go into the practices and how to relate to both the high and low on these different tendencies. I'd like to close with a couple closing thoughts here. One is from Loris Malaguzzi, the founder of the Reggio Emilia schools for young children. And that's, there's so many thoughts here. Seeing the child as an advocate for themselves, and with this great capacity for curiosity and amazement, and to create relationships. And they're open to us because that's how they learn. And early in life, they're learning about the social and physical worlds, both through their own self-initiated exploration that they need time to focus on, and through their interactions with us. And they're learning about everything that culture brings to them. And that's so important because they want to become part of our human community. Another thought from Jerry Paul is that how you are is important as what you do. And that warmth, that calmness, that presence, that letting the child know I'm here for you is just as important as any moment in which you're teaching or trying to do something in particular, trying to do a routine even. And then finally, I'd like to close on a thought from Ron Lally and me, which sums up what I've been trying to say the whole presentation, and that is the emotional tenor of the child's whole experience It influences what's happening with the developing brain. So when we attend to that whole experience, especially the emotional tenor, we can provide caring relationships that help that child feel secure and open up a world for that child to explore and learn throughout the early years. So those 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds can just enjoy life and get everything possible from it. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, querido Peter. Ahora, Carmencita ha recogido algunas preguntas del público, que han habido un montón, ¿no? Carmencita, vamos con las preguntas.
Sí, buenas tardes, doctor Peter. Muchas gracias por su ponencia. Voy a hacerle 2 preguntas, una vinculada a los niños y otra vinculada a las maestras. ¿Ya? No voy a poder hacérselas todas. La primera tiene que ver, dice así, nos gustaría saber qué dicen las nuevas investigaciones sobre la importancia de las interacciones de los niños en su propia cultura, ¿no? Con su lengua materna en los primeros 3 años y el efecto que tienen estas interacciones en su desarrollo emocional, social y cognitivo.
A very important question. Thank you for asking it. What we know is that children, every language they're learning, if they're going to learn language well, need rich experience with every language. So the research shows that what's most important is that the child is learning at least one human language well to develop well. And the second thing that we can learn, we know from research, is if a child learns one language well, they can learn a second language well too. That the 2 languages or 3 languages work together for the child. You need to support both for that child to grow and learn language and be able to communicate effectively. So that's part of the answer. The other part of the answer is we need to think about that whole child's experience. And language is fundamentally embedded in the cultural experience, in the family experience, in the life of that child. So if we want to understand that child, we have to understand the language that the child is learning at home with the family, and we want to support that to continue to develop, because we know that children so if that first language develops well, and then let's say there's a different language in your program, that we know those children who become truly bilingual or multilingual, they develop self-regulation better. They gain some skills. Their brains start to learn how to work between 2 languages, which is a very important skill. And so if we think about how we want to support that whole child emotionally and culturally in the family, we want to support that language of the family. And if there's another language to learn as the child comes into our programs or our services, we give support to that child, but we want to give the message that that first language is very important too.
Muchas gracias. Ahora voy a hacerle la segunda pregunta que está vinculada a las docentes, ¿no? Dice, ya que nosotros como maestras debemos estar bien emocionalmente para poder brindar esa misma estabilidad a nuestros alumnas, a nuestros niños, ¿qué tan importante es implementar programas psicológicos para los docentes a lo largo del año escolar? Más bien programas de bienestar, ¿no? Y en el mismo sentido, hay otra pregunta, ¿no? Que dice, en la sala cuna hay muchos niños y hay días que son muy intensos y las docentes necesitan apoyo emocional. Entonces, ¿cuáles serían las formas más efectivas de apoyar y sostener a las docentes de niños pequeños?
Another very important question, because the kind of interactions I've been talking about, where you are emotionally connected to the child, in order to be that calm presence and responsive presence, you need to have an inner calm in yourself. If you are very stressed, you're not going to be able very well to provide the kind of responsive relationship experience that I described in this presentation. So how do we support people? I think ideally, we try to create a situation where they're not overwhelmed. So a reasonable number of children to work with, not an overwhelming number. We need to give psychological support because we know that some children coming into programs have experienced issues early in life. And so consultation with someone who understands mental health pretty steadily will be helpful. And part of that consultation is to support the adult and really understand the adult's perspective. And part of that consultation is to help the adult understand the child's perspective and what the child is communicating. I think if you can afford it, if you have the means to set up those kinds of supports, that's very important. And I know I can tell you in the United States, we are very challenged because people who provide care to 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds are not paid well. They're not recognized for the very important work they're doing. And if we could address those areas in the United States, I think we could be better at providing the kind of care that I described today.
Muchas gracias, doctor Peter. No sé, Patti, si hay todavía para hacer una pequeña pregunta o ya cerramos.
Ya, una más.
Muy
Un tiempito chiquito y luego le voy a dar el espacio a la
Yes.
directora de educación inicial que está con nosotros presentes también. Rapidito, tú una pregunta y
Ya.
ya.
Bueno, hay aquí una pequeña que es cómo ayuda el apego a que las niñas y niñas puedan manejar sus sentimientos y emociones en el contexto del servicio educativo. Y con eso acabamos.
So could you repeat, there was one part I didn't understand. Could you repeat the question, please?
Sí. ¿Cómo ayuda el apego seguro a que las niñas y niños puedan manejar sus sentimientos y emociones en los servicios educativos?
Yes. Again, another very important question. So children who are securely attached, they will naturally look to the person they have a secure attachment relationship with for guidance. If they feel emotionally out of sorts, they know that person will be there to support them. They also can spend time by themselves because they've learned through that relationship that adult has them in mind, and that children develop mentally and they start to understand that and know that person cares about them and thinks about them even when they're not there. And I think it's that feeling which helps children do the exploration, do the play, develop those relationships with each other that will happen when they have that emotional security from the attachment relationship.
Okay.
Muchas
Bueno,
gracias. Te dejo, Patti.
Sí, no, ya estamos al cierre. La directora nacional de educación inicial me ha pedido un pequeño, muy chiquitito de mitad, porque ya estamos en hora, ya se acaba el webinar, el espacio, así que una palabrita chiquitita para Peter y ya para despedirnos de este evento.
Peter, muy buenas tardes. Es una gran alegría haber tenido esta oportunidad. La han gozado, disfrutado muchas maestras del Perú y sé que de otros países. Solo desearte mucha energía para seguir investigando y sobre todo para respaldar este enfoque que estamos aplicando en la Dirección de Educación Inicial, en Educuna sobre todo, que es centrarnos en la idea de un niño competente. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Be happy with this approach. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Ah, Gracias, querida Emma. No, Peter, de verdad que ha sido maravilloso tenerte en ese momento. Creo que hemos aprendido un montón, 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 efectivamente. Cómo nos conectamos, yo me quedo con algo de cómo nos conectamos desde el corazón con el niño, cómo nos conectamos desde quiénes somos, desde nuestros sentires, ¿no? Y desde ahí efectivamente dar lo mejor para hacer que nuestras infancias vivan lo más felices posibles. A nivel de toda América Latina creo que tenemos una tarea gigante que hacer. Y nada, muchísimas gracias, muchísimas gracias. Ya me quedo por el tema del tiempo. Muchas gracias por este espacio. Ahora sí, ya nos quedamos un ratito para una foto final. Si podemos, Mari, nos tomamos una foto final todas, ¿sí? Sí, muchísimas gracias. Mira, hay gente de todo el país. Mari, nos tomamos la foto final.
Listo, muchas gracias.
Ok, adiós. Muchas gracias por esta oportunidad.